The engines announced themselves before the men did. That deep, rolling thunder, the kind that doesn't ask permission, rippled through the morning air of Millhaven like a warning no one had put into words yet. Birds scattered from the rooftops. Old Mr. Parrish dropped his newspaper on the porch steps. Children pressed their noses against the dirty glass of the orphanage windows, their breath fogging the panes. Then they came around the corner. 12 motorcycles, maybe 14, chrome flashing like war medals under the early sun, leather vests thick with patches, skull insignias, and the kind of road dust that only comes from riding through storms and not caring. These weren't casual riders. These weren't weekend enthusiasts with their carefully polished bikes and matching helmets. These were the Iron Covenant. And the Iron Covenant didn't ride into small towns for no reason. The bikes rolled slowly, deliberately, down the cracked asphalt lane that led to the wide-open iron gate of St. Bridget's Children's Home, a sagging two-story building that had once been painted white and now wore something closer to surrender. The shutters were slightly crooked, the gutters sagged, but someone had planted marigolds along the front path, bright and stubborn, standing in defiant little rows. The riders stopped. Engines cut. And in that sudden silence, the only sound that remained was the sharp, rhythmic clang of a wrench striking metal. No one looked up from beneath the hood of the battered pickup truck parked at the side of the building. Just the clang, clang, clang. The leader of the Iron Covenant, a man who went by the name Cutter, 6'2", salt and pepper beard, a jaw that looked like it had been carved from the same granite as the mountains he'd ridden through, swung one leg off his bike and stood. He pushed his sunglasses up, looked at the truck, looked at the figure beneath it. He'd been riding for 30 years. He'd seen things that would make most men forget their own names. He'd buried brothers and christened nephews and sat at countless campfires where men said things they'd never say in the daylight. But something about that moment, the wrench clanging while 14 bikers stood silent, made him feel something he couldn't immediately name. He walked toward the truck. He crouched down, and from beneath the undercarriage, a pair of grease-dark hands slid into view, gripping a wrench like it was the hilt of a sword. "Hand me the half-inch socket," said a voice, calm, unhurried, like she hadn't just been interrupted by the sound of 14 motorcycles pulling into her front yard. Cutter blinked. One of his men, Reef, the youngest, barely 25, scrambled to find the half-inch socket in the tool chest by the truck's wheel. He found it, placed it in the extended hand. The hand took it, disappeared. More clanging. Cutter waited. The woman slid out from under the truck a minute later. She sat up, swept a rag across her forehead, and looked at the line of leather-clad men with the same expression someone might use to assess a weather forecast, interested but not particularly moved. She was maybe 23, 24 at most, medium height, work-worn jeans, a tank top smudged with motor oil, dark hair pulled back with what appeared to be a bungee cord. Her hands were stained at the knuckles, and her eyes were the color of a sky that had already decided what kind of day it was going to be, clear, direct, and not easily changed. Her name was Nora, and for 3 years, she'd been the only thing standing between St. Bridget's Children's Home and complete collapse. She looked at Cutter. Cutter looked at her. He said, "We've got a problem with a Harley." She stood up. "Then let's see the Harley." What she said next made the entire club go silent. And what they did after, no one in that town of Millhaven would ever forget. To understand what happened that morning and why it mattered, you have to understand what St. Bridget's was and what Nora was. Because neither of them were what they appeared to be. St. Bridget's Children's Home had been built in 1961 by a woman named Sister Agnes, who believed that every child abandoned by the world deserved at least one person who showed up. The building itself was not impressive. It never had been. But for 60 years, it had held warmth. The kind of warmth that seeps into walls over decades of children being put to bed, of small voices learning to sing, of hands being held through nightmares. By the time Nora came along, Sister Agnes had passed. The diocese had restructured. The county had cut funding twice. The roof had developed opinions of its own about where the rain should go, and the boiler had started making a sound that the town plumber described as philosophically uncertain. There were 11 children in residence. The youngest was 4. A boy named Pinto, nobody knew why. That was just what the kids called him, who had arrived 6 months ago and hadn't said a word yet, but who followed Nora around the property like a shadow with sneakers. The oldest was 16. A girl named Deja, who wore her skepticism like armor and whose bedroom window was perpetually open, looking out at the road, calculating the distance between here and somewhere else. Between those two, 9 other children, all of them in the care of 2 house mothers, kind women doing their best with catastrophically limited resources, and a rotating roster of volunteers who came and went with the seasons. And then there was Nora. Nora had arrived at St. Bridget's at age 7, left arm in a cast, not speaking. Nobody came for her. The county file was thin and vague the way county files about damaged children often are. She'd grown up within those slightly crooked walls, slept in the room at the end of the upstairs hall, and somewhere around age 14, she'd started fixing things. It began with a lawnmower, then a leaking faucet, then the alternator on one of the house mother's cars. She didn't take classes. She bought second-hand manuals from the library sale, watched videos on the community center's shared computer, and learned through the oldest method available to human beings, paying attention and refusing to quit. By 18, she was the most competent mechanic in a 20-mile radius. By 20, 3 local garages had offered her jobs. She turned them all down. She stayed at St. Bridget's. Not out of obligation, not out of guilt, but because someone had to, and she was the one who knew how. She fixed the boiler. She patched the roof twice. She replaced the wiring in the east wing when it started sparking, sourcing parts from junkyards and doing the work herself on weekends, following wiring diagrams spread across the kitchen table while the kids did homework around her. She took in mechanical repair work from locals, not through a proper business, no storefront, no sign, no official anything, but through word of mouth. People in Millhaven knew that if your car was dying and your wallet was thin, you brought it to the girl at St. Bridget's. She'd fix it honest and charge what it was worth, not $1 more, not $1 less. She never charged what the market would bear. She charged what the work actually cost, in parts and hours. And she refused tips. This was not a quirk, it was a conviction. Nora had decided, sometime in the long solitary years of learning to survive in a world that had not been arranged with her in mind, that charity was a kind of trap, that accepting something you hadn't earned put you in debt to the world in ways that were hard to see and harder to climb out of. She'd watched adults at St. Bridget's navigate the humiliation of donations, the politics of benefactors, the fragile gratitude that could curdle if the money stopped coming. She wanted no part of it. If she fixed your car, you paid her. If you couldn't pay, you didn't get the work done. If you tried to pay her more than she asked, she'd hand the extra back with a look that discouraged argument. This made her, in the eyes of Millhaven, something between a curiosity and a legend. The kids at St. Bridget's called her by her name, not a title. She ate dinner with them and helped with homework, and on Friday nights, set up the old projector in the living room and showed movies. She didn't act like a caretaker. She acted like someone who happened to live there, who happened to know how to fix everything, and who would sit with you at 3 in the morning if the nightmare came back, no questions asked. Pinto, the small silent boy with the sneakers, would fall asleep on the couch with his head on her knee while she read. Deja, the 16-year-old with the open window, had once told her, in a rare moment of unguarded honesty, You're the only one who doesn't look at us like we're problems." Nora had looked back at her and said, "You're not a problem. You're just a person who hasn't figured out what they're building yet. Neither has anyone else. It just looks like they have." Deja had gone quiet. Then, after a long moment, "Is that actually true?" "Yeah," Nora had said, "I think so." That was Nora. The orphanage scraped by. Barely, always barely. The heating bill in winter was a recurring crisis. The truck used for supply runs and the occasional hospital trip had more miles on it than the county road and significantly more opinions. The roof, which Nora had patched, needed replacing properly. Not patching, replacing, which required money that did not exist. And now, on an ordinary Tuesday morning that was about to become something else entirely, a group of bikers had pulled into the front yard with a mechanical problem. The Harley in question was a 2003 Road King that had been making a sound for the last 80 miles that its owner, a man who went by Dublin, third from the front in the Iron Covenant's riding order, described as like a cat being argued with by a blender. Nora crouched beside it. She didn't touch it yet. She just looked, the way a doctor might look at a patient before asking a single question, taking inventory, reading the surface for what lay beneath. "When did it start?" she asked. "Outside of Harwick," Dublin said. "Maybe mile 40 on the highway." "At speed or idle?" "Both, more at speed." "You hit anything?" "Pothole, size of a swimming pool." She nodded, circled the bike slowly. Her eyes moved over the frame, the exhaust pipes, the front fork. She pressed 2 fingers against the primary chain case. "Your primary chain tensioner's loose," she said, "probably aggravated by the impact, and your exhaust gasket is leaking." She straightened. "I need about an hour." Dublin looked at Cutter. Cutter looked at the girl. "You sure?" he said, not challenging, genuinely asking. "I have a tensioner that'll work in the shop," she said, already moving. "Exhaust gasket I'll have to fabricate from what I've got, but it'll hold until you can get a proper one. Might hold longer, actually." She disappeared into the side of the building, what had once been a small garage, now serving as both storage space and her workshop, and returned with a rolling tool chest. She worked in silence. No performance, no commentary, just work. The bikers watched. At some point, Pinto materialized from around the corner of the building. He stood at a distance, watching Nora work, holding a juice box in both hands. He stared at the motorcycles with enormous eyes. One of the bikers, a large man called Shepherd, who was, despite appearances, a grandfather twice over, noticed the boy. He crouched to his height and said very gently, "You want to see?" Pinto looked at Nora. Nora glanced up, gave the tiniest nod. Pinto walked over. Shepherd showed him the chrome on his fuel tank, pointed out the stitching on his seat, made the engine sound "ar-rar-rar-rar-rar-rar-rar-rar" with his mouth, which caused Pinto to make the same sound back, which was, quietly, something. Inside the garage, Deja appeared in the doorway. She looked at the cluster of leather and chrome with the particular appraising eye of a teenager trying to determine whether a thing was cool or threatening. She concluded, apparently, that it was some of both, and stayed in the doorframe. 53 minutes after she'd started, Nora set down her torque wrench and said, "Start it." Dublin swung onto the bike and turned it over. The engine came up clean, smooth. The angry rattle was gone. He revved it twice. Every biker in the yard heard the difference. Cutter watched Dublin's face, the particular expression of a man whose machine has just been returned to him, and then looked back at Nora, who was wiping her hands on a shop rag, already cataloging what she needed to put back in the chest. "What do we owe you?" Cutter asked. She gave him a number. It was fair. Parts and an hour of labor at rates that would have made a proper shop laugh. Cutter reached into the inside pocket of his vest. He pulled out a folded amount of cash that was substantially larger than what she'd quoted. He held it out. Nora looked at it, looked at him. "That's too much," she said. "Consider the rest a tip," he said. The yard went quiet. Not the polite quiet of people pausing their conversations. The specific quiet that happens when something unexpected is occurring, and everyone present understands, without being told, that they should pay attention. Nora looked at the money, she looked at Cutter, and something moved through her expression, not offense, not anger, something closer to a door closing, gently, but firmly. She reached out and pushed his hand back. "I quoted you a price," she said. "I did the work, that's what you owe." Cutter didn't move. "We appreciate what you did, the tip's genuine." "I don't take tips." She said it the way someone states a physical fact, like the ground is solid or the sky is where it is. "I charged what the job was worth. If you think it was worth more, that's kind of you, but it doesn't change the price." Dublin, still on the bike, said, "Lady, we've got more money than." "I'm sure you do," she said, not unkindly. "That's not the point." She held out the exact amount she'd quoted. He took it. The transaction was complete. Cutter stood there for a moment. He was not a man who was often refused. He was not a man who typically needed to be. The Iron Covenant had 3 chapters across 2 states. They'd built things and broken things, and in recent years, mostly built toy drives, fundraisers for fallen officers' families, a veterans' shelter they'd helped renovate in the city. He knew what generosity looked like from both sides. What he was looking at now was something different. "You work out of here," he said, instead of arguing. "I work where the work is," she said. He looked at the building, the sagging gutters, the marigolds, the boy who had wandered back to Nora's side and was now standing close enough to press his elbow against her leg without quite touching it. "This the orphanage," he said. "Children's home," she said. "You grew up here." A pause, brief. "Yeah." He nodded slowly, like something was being added up in his head that he wasn't ready to speak aloud yet. "Good work," he said, and he meant the bike. She met his eyes. "You're welcome." The bikers mounted up. One by one, engines turned over. The thunder came back, that low, moving, chest-deep sound, and they rolled out of the yard the way they'd rolled in. Slow, deliberate. Cutter was last. He paused at the gate, half-turned, and looked back at the girl standing beside the battered truck with her tools and her kid and her marigolds. Then he rode away. The dust settled. Nora watched the road for a moment. Then she went back to the truck. Clang. Millhaven is not a large town. Nothing stays quiet in a small town. By evening, the story had already made it to the diner on Route 9, where Carla Reyes worked the dinner shift and had an encyclopedic knowledge of every notable event in a 30-mile radius for the last 20 years. By morning, it was at the hardware store. By the following afternoon, it had taken on the particular warm distortion of local legend, the part where the facts start to mean more than they strictly contain. She turned down $1,000, people said. Some said 2,000. Nobody knew the actual number, and that anonymity gave the story room to grow. From the Iron Covenant, they said, which had its own weight. Bob Featherstone, who ran the gas station on the main road and had known Nora since she was 9 years old and had wandered in to ask why his pump display was showing the wrong numbers. She'd spotted a calibration error, fixed it for him, and refused the candy bar he offered as payment, said, "That girl doesn't change. She was like that at 9. She'll be like that at 90. He said it with more admiration than exasperation, though there was some of both. At St. Bridget's, the weeks that followed were not easy. They rarely were in autumn. The oil bill for the upcoming heating season had arrived. It was beyond what the home's accounts could absorb without cutting into the food budget. The roof over the east wing, which Nora had patched in April, had started showing new problems in a different place, as old roofs do, solving one issue by quietly opening another. There was a section of plumbing in the downstairs bathroom that had decided to become a philosophical problem rather than a mechanical one. Nora worked, she always worked. But even she couldn't fabricate money from engine parts. She took on extra repair jobs, driving out to farms and small businesses around the county, staying late, arriving early. She sold a motorcycle engine she'd rebuilt on spec, beautiful work, a year of patient weekends, to a buyer in the city. She did the math on the oil bill 15 different ways, looking for a version of the numbers that cooperated, and they never did. One evening, she was sitting at the kitchen table after dinner, the bills spread in front of her, the house quiet with sleeping children, when the older house mother, a woman named Mrs. Calloway who had been at St. Bridget's for 11 years, sat down across from her and said, gently, "There are people in town who would help Nora, people who have offered." Nora was quiet for a moment. "I know," she said. It wouldn't compromise anything. It would just be." "I know," she said again. Mrs. Calloway waited. "I'm not there yet," Nora said. It was honest, not proud, just honest. "Let me try the other ways first." Mrs. Calloway nodded. She knew when to stop. What neither of them said, and both of them understood, was that the other ways were running out. 3 weeks after the Iron Covenant's visit, on a Saturday afternoon when Nora was under the truck again, a new injector issue, always something new, Deja appeared beside the rear tire and said, without preamble, "Did you know they've been parked on Route 9 3 times this week?" Nora paused her work. "Who?" "The bikers, different guys each time, but same patches." A beat. "I googled the patch, Iron Covenant, same club." Nora slid out from under the truck, sat up, looked at the girl. Deja's arms were crossed. She had the look she got when she was trying to appear less curious than she was. "They're just sitting there, in the parking lot at the hardware store. They buy coffee and they sit there." "How do you know this?" "I walk, Nora. I walk a lot, I see things." Nora thought about that. "Did they say anything?" "To me, no, but the one with the gray beard, he watched the gate when I walked past. Not creepy, just," she paused, searching for the right word, "paying attention." "Paying attention." Nora looked at the road beyond the gate, the ordinary, empty road. "Go inside," she said to Deja. "I'm not a little kid." "I know, go inside anyway." Deja went inside, in the manner of a 16-year-old who wants you to know that she is complying voluntarily and could just as easily not. Nora stayed outside in the fading light. She looked at the road. She looked at the truck, which needed the injector fixed. She looked at the roof over the east wing, which was going to need more than patching. She looked at the marigolds, which were starting to lose the argument with October. Something was coming. She didn't know what it was yet, but she felt it the way you feel pressure dropping before a storm, not with your skin, but with something underneath your skin, something older. She went back under the truck. Clang! Cutter sat in a parking lot in the late afternoon light and drank a coffee that had gone cold 20 minutes ago and thought about the girl with the bungee cord in her hair. He'd been riding 29 years. He'd met a lot of people. You developed over the miles a particular sensitivity to character, the way a dog does or a child does before the world teaches them to ignore instinct. You learn to read people in the compressed geography of a first impression, what they were afraid of, what they wanted, what they'd given up on. The girl, Nora, had no fear in her first impression. That was unusual. Most people, confronted with 14 bikers, managed some flavoring of unease. It didn't have to be much. A tightening around the eyes, a slightly careful quality in the voice. Even people who were genuinely comfortable with bikers usually performed a version of that comfort, made it visible as if to clarify, "I'm not scared." Nora hadn't performed anything. She'd asked for the half-inch socket. The thing about real composure, Cutter had learned this slowly over the years, is that it comes from not needing anything from the person in front of you. Fear is a transaction. It says, "Please don't take something from me." Nora had nothing she needed from the Iron Covenant, and so she had nothing to protect, and so she had nothing like fear. But the other thing, the thing that had been sitting in the back of Cutter's mind for 3 weeks, quietly rearranging his thinking, was the refusal. He'd offered her money, good money, generous money, the kind of money that, for a struggling children's home, could make a tangible difference. She'd pushed it back. Not because she was too proud to accept help. He'd been watching her carefully for 3 weeks. In the unobtrusive way the club had learned to watch things when they were deciding whether something warranted their attention. She wasn't too proud. She helped people constantly. She accepted help from the volunteer who fixed the fence on weekends. She accepted help from the delivery driver who sometimes brought extra boxes and pretended he'd miscounted. She refused money that hadn't been earned. That was the distinction. It wasn't pride, it was a principle. And here was the thing that kept rolling around the back of Cutter's mind, refusing to quiet down. He respected it. He fully respected it. And because he respected it, he didn't want to violate it. He didn't want to hand her an envelope, or write a check to the home, or do any of the normal things a person with resources does when they want to help a cause they believe in. Because she hadn't asked for that kind of help. She hadn't asked for anything. He talked it over with the officers of the club. All 3 of them had sat around a table for a long evening, and they'd talked about the girl and the kids and the leaking roof and the look of the place, functional and falling apart at the same time, like someone was fighting a losing battle with perfect technique. And by the end of the evening, someone had said the thing that unlocked the rest of it. She didn't want charity, one of them had said, so don't give her charity. Give her something else. The morning it happened was a Thursday. It had rained overnight, not hard, just persistent, and the world had that particular gray-gold look of an early autumn morning that's deciding whether to commit to the season or hold out for one more warm day. The marigolds along the front path were beaten down by it. The gutters were doing their interpretive work, draining from 3 different wrong locations. Nora was in the kitchen, making oatmeal, counting children at the table when she heard it. Low, distant, getting closer. The deep, rolling, orchestral rumble of many motorcycles moving in formation. Pinto heard it first. He lifted his head from his oatmeal bowl with the radar alert expression of someone who's been cataloging sounds carefully. His eyes went wide. "Nora," said Deja from the kitchen doorway, her voice carrying an odd note, "you need to come outside." Nora turned off the burner. She walked to the door. She opened it. And there they were. Not 12, not 14. 43 motorcycles, rolling in slow formation down the lane toward St. Bridget's gate. 3 across where the lane allowed it. Leather and chrome and engine thunder. Every one of them wearing the Iron Covenant patch. And behind the motorcycles, 4 pickup trucks, 2 cargo vans, a flatbed with lumber. Nora stood on the front step. The children, one by one, appeared behind her, pressing into the doorframe, crowding the porch, standing in small clusters on the path, silent with the particular focused silence of children confronted with something genuinely extraordinary. The motorcycles pulled into the yard and along the lane and around the side of the building, filling every available space. Engines cut, one by one, like instruments settling after an orchestra finishes playing. Cutter swung off his bike. He walked toward Nora. He stopped 6 feet away. He took off his sunglasses. "We need to talk about what we're doing here before we do it," he said. "Because I want to make sure you understand the way we're thinking about this." Nora said nothing. She waited. He said, 3 weeks ago you fixed our brother's bike. You did it right. You charged fair, you gave back the extra." He paused. "I've been thinking about that a lot." "Why?" she said. "Because it's rare," he said. "What you did, the way you do things, it's rare. And the thing about rare is when you find it, you pay attention to it. He looked at the building, the trucks, his men who were beginning to move quietly, purposefully, unloading supplies, gathering tools, organizing in small groups with the practiced efficiency of people who have done this kind of work before. "We're not here to give you charity," he said. "We're here to work same as you." Nora stared at him. "What?" she said. "The roof first," Cutter said. "We've got 3 guys who roof professionally and 8 more who have helped enough to know what they're doing. We brought materials. After the roof, there's a plumbing crew for whatever you've got downstairs. After that, the gutters. We've got an electrician who wants a look at your panel." He paused. Dublin said he'd fix the boiler. He worked HVAC for 12 years before he started writing full-time. Nora looked at him. She looked at the trucks. She looked at the men moving around the yard with lumber and toolboxes and tarps. She looked at Shepard, the grandfather, who had apparently been designated the children's liaison. He was already crouched in the middle of a semicircle of 6 kids, showing them something on his phone with great animation. Nora said very quietly, "I didn't ask for this." "No," said Cutter, "you didn't. I can't pay for Olive. We're not billing you." She shook her head, and the old refusal rose in her. The principle, the conviction, the carefully constructed wall of self-reliance she'd been building since she was 7 years old, and learned that the world did not keep its promises unless you held it to them yourself. "Then I can't accept." "Nora." She stopped. He had said her name. He'd learned it somewhere from someone in the 3 weeks he'd been paying attention. He said it with the weight of someone who'd thought about what they were going to say and how they were going to say it. "You didn't accept charity," he said. "We offered you charity 3 weeks ago. You refused it, and you were right." He let that sit for a moment. "This is different." "How is it different?" "Because we chose it," he said. "Not out of pity, not because you asked, because you showed us something we wanted to show respect to." He looked at her directly. "We're not here for you. We're here because of you. You understand the difference." She stared at him. Above them, on the roof, the first 2 men were already climbing. The sound of lumber being sorted behind the building was calm and efficient. One of the vans had opened its rear doors, and several large coolers were visible, food, apparently, for the crew and perhaps beyond. Deja appeared at Nora's shoulder, 16 years old, already calculating the implications of what she was seeing. "Nora," Deja said quietly, "let them." Nora looked at her. Deja looked back, and in her expression was something that Nora rarely saw in the girl's face, something unguarded, something that didn't calculate distance to the door. "Let them," she said again. They worked for 9 hours. 9 hours of hammers and drills and voices calling back and forth over the noise. 9 hours of children periodically underfoot, asking questions that were tolerated with remarkable patience by men who mostly communicated in short sentences and meaningful silences. 9 hours of watching the building, the sagging, beloved, falling apart building, begin slowly to stand up straighter. The roof over the east wing was stripped and replaced. Clean shingles, properly sealed, properly flashed at the joints. The gutters were rehung, realigned, repitched to drain where they were supposed to drain. The downstairs plumbing was diagnosed by a man named Rook who talked to pipes the way other people talk to difficult relatives, not unkindly, but with expectation, and fixed it in 3 hours. The boiler was serviced by Dublin, who disappeared into the basement and emerged 2 hours later with a list of parts, called someone from his phone, and received a delivery within the hour. When he turned the boiler on in the early afternoon, it ran with a sound it hadn't made in years. Quiet, efficient, purposeful. 3 younger men repainted the front of the building. White. Clean white, not the surrender white of weather and neglect. The kind of white that said, someone lives here who cares about it. The electrician, a short, methodical man named Tors who wore his helmet like a crown, went through the panel, replaced two breakers that were operating on faith rather than mechanics, and grounded something that had been quietly ungrounded for at least 2 years. By late afternoon, the food had come out of the coolers, not just supplies for the workers, an improbable quantity of groceries, the kind of careful shopping that someone had thought through, pantry staples, fresh vegetables, things that last and things that are good. It filled the kitchen to a degree that made Mrs. Calloway stand in the doorway with both hands over her mouth. Nora sat on the front steps in the middle of it all, watching. At some point, Pinto came and sat beside her. He pressed his elbow against her arm in the way he had. She looked down at him. He was watching the motorcycles in the yard with the deep satisfaction of someone who has concluded that the world contains more good things than he'd initially budgeted for. She looked up at the roof, new shingles, bright and even in the late afternoon light. She looked at the freshly painted front wall. She looked at the gutters, running properly, carrying the residue of last night's rain away the way gutters are supposed to. She felt something moving through her chest that she didn't immediately have a name for. It was larger than gratitude and quieter than joy. It was the particular feeling of being seen, not with pity, not with condescension, not with the slightly removed concern of someone observing a problem from a safe distance, but with something that felt, unexpectedly, like respect. Cutter sat down on the step beside her. They sat in silence for a while, watching his men work. Eventually, she said, "Why did you come back?" He thought about it. "You want the honest answer." "Yeah. Because you reminded us of something," he said. "Somewhere in 30 years of riding, you start to think you know what matters. Money, territory, brotherhood, reputation." He watched Tors pack up his tools. Then you meet someone who's already made that list and thrown out everything that doesn't earn its place. And you think, "Oh, right, that's it." She looked at the road. "I'm just trying to keep the lights on." "That's not all you're doing," he said. She didn't answer, but she didn't argue. He reached into the inside pocket of his vest. She stiffened slightly. He pulled out a card, a business card, plain, just a phone number and the words Iron Covenant. He held it out. "Not money," he said, "just in case something needs fixing that you can't fix alone." She looked at the card for a long moment. She took it. And then Cutter said it, the thing he'd been thinking about for 3 weeks, the distillation of the long evening around the table, the thing that had moved from the back of his mind to the front of it and stayed there. "You didn't want charity," he said, "so we made sure you never needed it." The Iron Covenant left at dusk. 43 motorcycles, single file now, moving slowly back down the lane, engines settling into their rhythm, chrome catching the last of the light. The children stood along the front path and watched them go. Someone, Shepherd, raised one hand as he rode past, and several of the children raised their hands back. Pinto raised his hand. And then quietly, completely without fanfare, Pinto said a word. "Bye." Just that, small and definite, like a fact he'd been saving for when it mattered. Nora heard it. She turned and looked at him. Pinto lowered his hand and looked back at her with an expression of perfect calm, as if he'd been speaking all along and everyone had simply failed to notice. She crouched down in front of him. She didn't say anything. He didn't say anything else. They stayed like that for a moment, the last of the motorcycles rolling past, the sound of the engines fatting down the road toward wherever the road went next. Then she stood up. She looked at the building. The new roof, the new paint, the lights in the windows, warm and even, powered by a panel that worked properly now, the gutters clean and silent, the front door slightly repaired where it had been sticking. Deja was standing at the edge of the path, watching the road long after the last engine had faded to silence. She stood with her arms crossed, but differently than she usually did, not armor this time. More like she was holding herself together around something that had surprised her. Nora walked over. They stood side by side. After a while, Deja said, "You know why they did it, right?" "Yeah," Nora said. "Because you didn't ask," Deja said. "Because you refused." "Yeah." Deja was quiet. "Then that's kind of backwards." "Maybe," Nora said. "Or maybe the refusing is the point. Maybe it tells you something about a person, what they're willing to hold onto when it would be easier to let go." Deja looked at her. The calculating look had softened. "What did you hold on to?" Nora thought about the 7-year-old in the cast, the manuals from the library sale, the lawnmower, the 12 years of keeping this place alive the only way she knew how, the principle, the wall, the thing she'd built to stay standing. "Just myself," she said, "that's all." Deja looked at the road. "That's not a small thing," she said. "No," Nora agreed, "it's not." Inside, Mrs. Calloway was making dinner in a kitchen that was, for the first time in recent memory, genuinely stocked. The smell of it drifted out through the screen door, something warm and substantial, the smell of more than enough. The marigolds along the path, beaten down by last night's rain, were already beginning to straighten in the evening air. Nora looked at them, and for the first time in a long time, maybe in years, she felt the particular, quiet miracle of having received exactly what she needed without having had to ask for it. Not charity, not pity, just people who had seen her and responded to what they saw. She went inside. There's a version of strength that announces itself, loud and clear and visible from a distance. And then there's the kind of strength that doesn't announce anything. It just shows up, day after day, under the truck, on the roof, at 3 in the morning when the nightmare comes back, in the refusing of what would be easy in favor of what is honest. Nora never went looking for the Iron Covenant's help. She never asked for it. She earned it the only way it was possible to earn it, by being exactly who she was, completely, without apology, without performance. And sometimes that's the thing. Sometimes the help that changes everything doesn't come because you asked. It comes because someone was watching, because someone, somewhere, saw the particular quality of how you held yourself together and decided that deserved a response. Pinto spoke his first word that evening. By the end of the week, he'd added 4 more. Deja stopped leaving her window open at night. She started, very slowly, looking less at the road and more at the room she was in. And Nora went on fixing things. The truck, the boiler, the small broken pieces of the world that arrived at her door because word had gotten around that she did honest work at honest prices. She never called the number on the card, but she kept it. Sometimes the strongest people aren't the ones who accept help. They're the ones who inspire it. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of someone you know, or something you believe in, take a second and leave a like. Subscribe for more stories like this one, because there are people out there doing extraordinary things in the quietest possible ways. And they deserve to be seen.